In Iceland, there's a museum of preserved animal private parts. In Minnesota, deadly poison darts, shark tooth spears, and venomous snakes sit locked away. And in Missouri, you can walk through the remnants of an old psychiatric hospital with restraint chairs, lobotomy tools, and other devices used to torment patients. These are more mysterious museums that contain dangerous, bizarre items. Iceland is full of weird museums, apparently. There's one in a public toilet dedicated to punk music, there's a museum of witchcraft, and then there's the Icelandic Phallological Museum, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's the world's only museum dedicated to collecting private parts from every male mammal species. There are over 300 specimens. The collection includes everything from a hamster dong that you need a magnifying glass to see, a 170 centimeter section of a sperm whale dingus that weighs nearly 155 pounds, and it's displayed in a giant glass tube filled with formaldehyde. Most of the specimens are preserved in formaldehyde or dried and mounted on walls, but formaldehyde is toxic, of course. Prolonged exposure causes respiratory issues, skin irritation, and it's been linked to cancer. The museum has to carefully control temperature and ventilation because if those seals break, you've got toxic fumes filling the building. The founder started the collection in 1974 after friends gave him a bull's junk as a joke, and he spent decades collecting specimens from whales, seals, polar bears, and eventually in 2011, even human donor. The museum gets about 70,000 visitors a year. The Science Museum of Minnesota keeps a lot of its more dangerous items in the back, away from visitors. One of the main things they don't put on display is a snakeskin quiver from the Chachi people of Ecuador. Inside it are thin darts that were traditionally coated in curare, a poison that can paralyze you by shutting down your muscles. The darts are old, but the museum has them carefully stored away because nobody really wants to take chances with something that was designed to instantly drop an animal. They also have a shark tooth spear, a wooden pole lined with real shark teeth, sharp enough to slice skin with barely any pressure. Staff say these kinds of weapons are hard to handle because you can cut yourself just by picking them up the wrong way, so they keep it wrapped and secured in storage. Another item that never makes it to the public exhibits is a preserved green mamba. Even though the snake has been dead for years, the species is known for having one of the most dangerous venoms in Africa. It's just safer for everyone if it stays in the research labs in the back. In St. Joseph, Missouri, there's a museum housed in an old mental hospital. It's called the Glore Psychiatric Museum, and it's one of the most disturbing places you can visit. The museum was founded in 1968 by George Glore, who worked at the Missouri State Hospital for over 40 years. He wanted to show people how far mental health treatment had come by displaying all the barbaric stuff that they used in the past. And when I say barbaric, I do mean it. There are full-size replicas of devices like the tranquilizer chair, which strapped patients down so leeches could be applied to their skin. There's the bath of surprise, which involved plunging patients into ice-cold water. A lot of them drowned. There's the lunatic box, a wooden cage barely big enough to stand in, and then there's a giant treadmill where patients were forced to walk for up to 48 hours straight. The museum also has real equipment from the 20th century, electric shock devices, lobotomy tools, restraint belts, ice picks used for lobotomies. One exhibit shows 1,446 nails, pins, screws, and buttons that were surgically removed from a patient's stomach. Another shows a TV that a patient stuffed with over 500 handwritten notes because he thought the television would transmit them to God. The Imperial War Museum in London has a lot of weapons and wartime objects, including some that are still dangerous. Right in the atrium, there's a V-2 rocket from the 40s. During the war, these things destroyed huge chunks of London. One landed just yards from where the rocket sits now, destroying an apartment building and killing 43 people in 1945. Between September 1944 and March 1945, more than 1,000 of these things were fired at Britain. Tens of thousands of workers died just making the rockets and their explosives before any of them even left Germany, and thousands more were killed or injured when the missiles hit, of course. The rocket at the museum was brought over in 1946. And is almost 46 feet tall, stretching close to the ceiling. It's safe now, but seeing it up close does give you a sense of just how destructive it was. This place looks charming when you first walk in. With its vintage wood cabinets and old medicine bottles, the aesthetic is perfect, so much so that people have weddings here. It's funny when you think about what's actually inside those bottles, though. The New Orleans Pharmacy Museum preserves 19th century apothecary history, which means they've got shelves full of legitimate poisons: arsenic, mercury chloride, laudanum, which is basically liquid opium that was sold over the counter. Some of the liquids in those bottles are original, like they've been sitting there since the 1800s. The museum keeps certain cabinets locked or sealed in glass because the powders have crystallized over time, and disturbing them could be dangerous. There's also a whole section on voodoo cures and love potions that were laced with narcotics. The museum's basically a preserved poison shop. One of the curators joked that if an old bottle broke, they'd have to evacuate the building, which I guess wasn't really technically a joke. At the British Museum in London, you'll find the Unlucky Mummy. It's not an actual mummy, it's a painted wooden coffin lid from an ancient Egyptian priestess who lived somewhere around 950 BCE. But for over 100 years, people have blamed it for deaths, accidents, financial ruin, all kinds of misfortune. This thing was even partially blamed for the sinking of the Titanic. It was first found in Thebes in the 1800s. Early collectors who owned it reported weird streaks of bad luck. Newspapers in 1890s London ran with it, turning the coffin lid into this cursed object. The museum eventually put it behind glass. Even now, though, some visitors refuse to take photos of it, afraid something will happen to them. Also in London is the Hunterian Museum, which had the skeleton of a man named Charles Byrne on display for over 200 years. Charles Byrne was known as the Irish Giant. He was 7'7" and became a public spectacle in 18th century London. But before he died in 1783, he made it very clear that he did not want to be dissected or put on display. He was terrified of ending up in a museum. And they were like, screw that, we're putting you on display at a museum. The surgeon John Hunter bribed someone to get Byrne's body and had it preserved for his collection. And for 2 centuries, Byrne's skeleton stood behind glass, part of the museum's medical exhibit. Then in 2017, the museum finally decided to take it down. They said it was never theirs to display in the first place, and keeping it up, of course, violated Byrne's wishes. Byrne's skeleton is still in the collection for research purposes, but the public can't see it anymore. Is that the right call? I don't know. I think it was wrong right after he died, but I mean, it's been 200 years. Put that big sucker up, let people gawk. The Codex Gigas is massive, 3 feet tall, 165 pounds, bound in leather that's probably animal hide. It's one of the largest medieval manuscripts still around, and it's nicknamed the Devil's Bible because of this full-page illustration of Satan inside it. Legend goes that a monk wrote the entire thing in one night after making a pact with the devil to avoid execution. It's now kept in the National Library of Sweden under tight environmental controls. They barely handle the thing. Visitors can see it through glass or look at digital scans, but actually touching the book is limited to a handful of experts. Not only is the book a delicate artifact, but the inks and tanning agents used in the binding contain toxins that can damage skin. So, in a way, this supposedly cursed book sorta lives up to the legend. And of course, we gotta talk about the Warren Occult Museum. It's not open to the public anymore, but the collection is still there, and it's full of items from actual cases Ed and Lorraine Warren worked on. There's all sorts of stuff here. A cursed piano that supposedly plays by itself, haunted paintings, shrunken heads, vampire coffins, and of course, the most infamous item in the museum is Annabelle the doll. But she's not the creepy porcelain doll from the movies. The real Annabelle is just a Raggedy Ann doll, like the kind you'd find at a garage sale, which somehow makes it worse. Annabelle in the movies is just so over the top looking. But the doll's been sitting behind glass for decades with a sign that says positively do not open. The story goes that priests had to come in and bless the room regularly because stuff would happen whenever people disrespected the doll. The most repeated story is about a guy who kept knocking on the glass and laughing, making fun of Annabelle. Then he died in a motorcycle accident that same night on the way home. Lorraine Warren said they handled the doll like a loaded weapon. They wouldn't move it without saying prayers first.
What if I told you the world's most terrifying artifacts aren't on display, but locked away in museum basements, hidden for a reason? From twisted mummies to cursed dolls, these are objects too dangerous, too disturbing, and too unexplained to ever meet the public eye. Hidden behind a secret door in Denmark's Little Museum of Nykøbing Falster, sorry, my Danish isn't very great, museum workers uncovered something straight out of a nightmare. A grotesque grotesque, wolf-headed humanoid preserved with unnerving realism. During renovations in 2017, staff stumbled upon a concealed chamber containing crates, documents, and sketches belonging to the eccentric Cornelius S.C. Rotter, the building's mysterious former owner. Among his bizarre collection was this unsettling figure carefully crafted from animal fur, bones, and disturbingly lifelike materials, sparking whispers of occult rituals and forbidden practices. Museum curators remain baffled, uncertain whether Rotter intended this creature as dark art, a ceremonial relic, or something far more sinister. Whatever the truth, it now remains locked safely away from public eyes, hidden in the back rooms, perhaps for our own protection. Hidden away in a museum's shadowy backroom sits a grotesque artifact that blurs the line between myth and nightmare. The skeletal remains of what can only be described as a centaur, a creature straight out of ancient Greek legend. Discovered tucked away behind locked doors in a European curiosity museum, this bizarre skeleton immediately sparked wild rumors about its origins. Constructed with startling anatomical precision, the piece seamlessly combines genuine human and equine bones, fueling unsettling theories of secret experiments or occult rituals conducted centuries ago. Museum insiders have hinted that the skeleton's origins trace back to an obscure 18th century collector known for his obsession with mythological hybrids, though details remain intentionally vague. Whether a twisted scientific hoax or a dark artifact with a genuinely cursed past, one thing's clear: there is a good reason it's being hidden far from the eyes of the public. Tucked away in a dimly lit museum storage room, hidden from public view, stands an artifact so strange it immediately sparks a sense of dread. A skeletal creature with oversized, almost alien features, known simply as the Atacama skeleton. Originally discovered in Chile's Atacama Desert, early tests baffled researchers due to its tiny size, elongated skull, and startlingly abnormal anatomy, fueling wild theories that ranged from extraterrestrial life to ancient curses. More detailed analysis eventually confirmed it was human, yet the mutations that warped its bones remained an eerie mystery, some speculating that ancient rituals or secretive experiments were involved. Now locked away behind closed doors, the skeleton remains a haunting relic, too unsettling to display openly, too intriguing to completely discard. Hidden deep within a museum's forbidden archives lies an artifact straight from your darkest childhood fears, a tiny, grotesque mummy known ominously as the Pixie specimen. Recovered by a private collector known as Alex C.F., this bizarre creature has sparked unsettling debates about its origins. With its shrunken, shriveled body, disturbingly lifelike features, and remnants of fiery red hair, it appears horrifyingly genuine. Some speculate it was crafted as a macabre Victorian curiosity, while others believe it to be physical evidence of mythological beings like fairies or pixies, secretly studied by occult societies. Locked away and rarely mentioned publicly, the Pixie specimen remains shrouded in secrecy, its unsettling presence haunting museum curators brave enough to enter the back room alone. Hidden in a dark museum storeroom lies an artifact so terrifying it feels plucked straight from sailor legends, known as the Fiji mermaid. Originally displayed in sideshows during the 19th century, this particular specimen is among the most unnerving ever discovered. Combining the dried upper torso of a monkey with the scaly body of a fish, its grotesque, glassy-eyed stare has sparked rumors of dark rituals, curses, and sightings of real aquatic humanoids. Sailors once believed owning a Fiji mermaid brought storms, shipwrecks, and madness, making museums hesitant to place them openly on display. Locked away, carefully hidden from public view, this creature now sits silently, fueling chilling whispers about what else the seas and secret museum storerooms might be hiding. Locked away in a museum's hidden chambers lies a chilling reminder of humanity's ancient past, the shockingly preserved body of the Tulland Man. Discovered buried deep in a Danish peat bog, this 2,400-year-old Iron Age sacrifice victim looks disturbingly fresh, as if frozen frozen in eternal sleep. Thanks to the bog's unique chemistry, scientists were not only able to determine exactly what his final meal was, but they could even lift his fingerprints after thousands of years. The rope still tightened around his neck suggests a grim, ritualistic end, fueling unsettling stories about ancient curses or vengeful spirits connected to his death. Museums carefully restrict access to him, afraid not just of damaging this priceless artifact, but perhaps wary of something darker lingering around the Tulland man's eternal resting place.
At the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum in New York, they've got green wallpaper from the 1830s. Back then, green would fade or turn brown, but in 1775, a chemist named Carl Wilhelm Scheele came up with a pigment that stayed bright. The museum's sample from 1836 used that pigment. Thing is, it's loaded with arsenic. Gregory Heringshaw, the museum's curator for wall coverings, explains that the danger mostly comes from handling it, saying the toxins are released mostly when they're rolled or unrolled or when you're pasting the back, which adds moisture. That moisture sets off chemical reactions that release the arsenic into the air. The wallpaper isn't on display, it's carefully wrapped and stored at consistent humidity. Down in Key West, Florida, there is a Civil War fort that's been turned into a museum, and inside that museum is what many consider the most haunted doll in America. His name is Robert, a seemingly regular-looking stuffed doll made in Germany around 1904. Looks like he came straight out of your grandma's attic, but don't let that fool you. This doll has a reputation that's gotten him featured on every paranormal show you can think of. The story goes that Robert was given to a boy named Gene Otto when he was a kid in Key West. Gene became obsessed with the doll. He'd talk to it for hours, and his parents swore they'd sometimes hear two different voices coming from his room. Neighbors reported seeing Robert move from window to window when the family was out. Furniture would be found overturned in Gene's room, and every time, Gene would say the same thing. Robert did it. After Gene died in 1974, the doll ended up in the attic. The new owners had a younger daughter who claimed Robert tried to attack her multiple times. In 1994, Robert was donated to the Fort East Martello Museum, and to this day, people say that cameras and electronics malfunction around him. Most staff won't go near him alone, and they get letters all the time from people writing to apologize to Robert for disrespecting him, begging him to lift whatever curse he put on them. At University College London, there's a small museum called the Grant Museum of Zoology. It's packed with thousands of preserved specimens, everything from tiny insects to whole animal skeletons, but the real concern isn't what's in the jars, it's what the jars are filled with. Most of these specimens have been sitting in formaldehyde or ethanol for over a century. Formaldehyde, we talked about earlier, it's a known carcinogen, and ethanol, when stored improperly, is highly flammable. The museum's most famous exhibit is a jar containing 18 moles, all crammed together and preserved in industrial methylated spirit, which is 95% ethanol and 5% methanol. Staff have to be extremely careful when handling it. If those old seals break down, well, you have toxic fumes leaking into the air. You've also got the Negus collection, which is a bunch of animal heads that were cut in half to show the larynx. Those are preserved in formalin, a mixture of formaldehyde and water. Museums with collections like this have very strict protocols. Staff wear protective gear, they work in ventilated areas, and they use Geiger counters if they think any specimens might be radioactive. There's a town in Quebec, Canada that used to be called Asbestos. In 2020, they changed the name because, who the hell wants to live in a place called Asbestos? But for over a century, this town was home to the Jeffrey Mine, one of the largest asbestos mines in the world, and they have a museum dedicated to it. The Asbestos Mineral Museum sits right next to the old mine, which is now just a massive water-filled crater. Inside the museum, though, they've got samples of chrysotile asbestos, which was once called the miracle fiber, because it's heat-resistant, it's strong, it was used in thousands of products. The thing is, asbestos fibers are microscopic and they're sharp. When you breathe them in, they pierce your lungs and they don't come out. Over time, that's obviously not good. Could lead to mesothelioma, which is an aggressive cancer. The museum displays raw asbestos samples, mining equipment, and products that used to contain it. Staff have to be extremely careful though, because any disturbance to the samples could release fibers into the air. And now we head back to the Science Museum of Minnesota, where there's also a collection called the Museum of Questionable Medical Devices. It's full of these bizarre, terrifying, and completely ineffective medical equipment from back in the day. There's a machine that claims to diagnose your personality by measuring bumps on your head. There's an electric therapy chair that was supposed to cure constipation by just violently rattling you. And then there's the X-ray shoe fitter. This thing was used in shoe stores in the 1920s all the way through the 70s. You'd put your feet into a machine, it would take an X-ray so you and the salesperson could see how your feet fit inside the shoes. I mean, it sounds convenient, except these machines were constantly leaking radiation. Customers were getting blasted with X-rays every time they used it, and people used it a lot. They'd stick their feet in multiple times just because it was kind of cool to see your bones. By the 70s, most states had banned them, but one was still being used in West Virginia in 1981. The museum's X-ray shoe fitter is sealed behind plexiglass now because even decades later, it's still giving off low levels of radiation. In Las Vegas, paranormal investigator Zak Bagans runs a museum full of allegedly haunted and cursed objects. But the crown jewel of the collection is probably the Dybbuk box. It's a small wooden wine cabinet about 12 inches tall, and it's considered by many to be the most haunted object in the world. The story starts in 2003 when a guy named Kevin Manis bought the box at an estate sale in Portland. He claimed it belonged to a Holocaust survivor who said it contained a Dybbuk, which in Jewish folklore is a malicious spirit that possesses people. Inside the box were some strange items: 2 old pennies, locks of hair, a dried rosebud, a small golden goblet, and a granite slab with Shalom carved into it. Manis said that as soon as he bought the box home, weird things started to happen. Nightmares, unexplained smells. His mother had a stroke shortly after touching it. He tried to give it away, but nobody wanted it, so he sold it on eBay. The next owner reported their hair falling out, having hives, coughing up blood. Then Jason Haxton, a museum curator, bought it and wrote a whole book about his experiences with the box. He claimed it made him sick, and that he had to consult rabbis to figure out how to contain it. In 2016, he donated it to Zak Bagans. Post Malone visited the museum and was there when Bagans touched the box for the first time. Post touched Bagans' shoulder while he was holding it, and shortly after, Post's plane had to make an emergency landing when the tires blew out. His Rolls-Royce got in a serious accident. His house was robbed. The box is still on display at Bagans Museum, and people still report feeling sick or uneasy around it. A mummified human hand once hidden inside a wall said to freeze victims in their sleep. Jars of preserved organs leaking fumes in a museum that smells faintly of chemicals and death. And a natural history exhibit sealed off because every animal inside turned out to be coated in poison. These are museums that contain items too dangerous to display. At the Whitby Museum in England, there's a shriveled, mummified hand kept under glass. It's what's called a Hand of Glory, a legendary object made from a severed hand. Supposedly, back in medieval times, thieves would make these from the hands of executed criminals. The idea was you'd light the fingers like candles, and supposedly everyone in the house would stay frozen asleep while you robbed them blind. Sounds ridiculous, but I mean, people believed it enough to actually make these things. The one in Whitby was found in 1935, hidden inside a wall of a cottage in Yorkshire. When they examined it, scientists confirmed that it was human. Doesn't really take a scientist to confirm that, though. I mean, just look at it. It is eerily well preserved. What they don't know is how it was preserved, which makes it even creepier. Staff say people get uncomfortable around this thing. One curator mentioned it's the one item nobody wants to move when they're rearranging exhibits. Next up is Mutter Museum in Philadelphia. This place looks like an old library, very classy looking, but won't find shelves of old books here. This museum is macabre, to say the least. You've got jars of preserved organs, remains of conjoined twins, skulls with diseases and deformities. It is gnarly stuff, but it's also really fascinating. I'd check this place out for sure, but what most visitors don't think about is that a lot of this stuff is actually hazardous. Back in the 18 and early 1900s, medical specimens were preserved using whatever chemicals worked. Arsenic, mercury, formaldehyde. And those chemicals don't just evaporate. They're still in there, still active. During some renovations, they actually had to close sections of the museum off because fumes were leaking from old jars. Just being near certain exhibits required safety measures. And then there's the biological side. Some of the tissues came from people who died of infectious diseases back when medicine didn't fully understand how they were transmitted. So there's a real question of whether any of the biological biological material could still pose a risk. The museum's been pretty upfront about it. A lot of their collection isn't even on display because it's either too fragile or too dangerous. Delbridge Museum of Natural History in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. In 2023, this museum suddenly shut down. They locked the doors and sealed off the taxidermy wing. Turns out the taxidermied animals on display were dangerous, contaminated with arsenic and other poisons. See, back in the early 1900s, taxidermists would soak animals' hides in arsenic soap to keep bugs from eating them. It worked great. Problem is, a century later, you've got displays that are basically toxic. The Great Plains Zoo, which sits right next to the museum, tested the collection and found that trying to clean or restore these things would just release carcinogenic dust into the air, so they made the call to just lock it all away and eventually dispose of it all. Nobody thought twice about standing right next to a mounted bison or elk. Kids probably touched the display cases. The whole time, there were harmful chemicals in the air. In Maryland, you'll find the National Museum of Health and Medicine. There are rows of shelves with preserved organs, deformities, amputated limbs, body parts from Civil War soldiers. Some of it's viewable, but a huge portion is locked away in storage, and there's a few reasons for that. First, a lot of these specimens are still sitting in their original 19th century preservation chemicals. Again, stuff that gives off harmful vapors if the seals break down. Staff work in ventilated areas with protective gear because just being around old jars can be a health risk. But there's also the ethical side. Some of the specimens were collected at a time where standards were not what they are today. Fetuses, body parts taken without proper consent. Museums are rethinking what should even be displayed anymore. But don't worry, there are still tons to see. Bits of human remains from autopsies, battlefield recoveries, and medical experiments. The Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. is one of the most famous museums in the world, but it also has some legitimately dangerous stuff tucked away in storage. Not what you'd think, either. It's old watches, airplane instrument panels, lab equipment. Thing is, it's all coated in radium paint. In the early 1900s, radium was used all the time. It glowed in the dark, so they used it in clocks, gauges, some old medical tools. Nobody understood how deadly it was yet. Factory workers, mostly women who later became known as radium girls, would even lick their brushes to get a finer point while painting with radium. A lot of them got sick and died from radiation poisoning. Now, those same objects are sitting in lead-lined storage at the Smithsonian. The conservation team uses Geiger counters before handling anything. Some pieces are safe enough to display for short periods, but others are giving off radiation levels that just can't be near the public. There's also a stash of uranium glass and radium health products that were sold to people back in the day. Radioactive water, radium suppositories, all kinds of insane stuff marketed as cures. And yeah, early science, it was pretty reckless. We were playing with things we just didn't understand. So, at a lot of museums, deep in storage, there's stuff that could actually hurt you if it wasn't handled properly.
Buried deep inside the vault of an undisclosed museum lies a chilling artifact you'd hope never to encounter. A bizarre, two-headed, bat-like creature preserved with disturbingly lifelike realism. Known simply as the dual-headed bat, this twisted specimen was first rumored to be discovered hidden within an old Victorian mansion, stashed away inside a locked chest marked with strange, illegible symbols. Its grotesque appearance, featuring sharp teeth, elongated limbs, and unsettlingly expressive faces, immediately sparked rumors of occult practices and dark alchemical experiments from the past. Curators remain tight-lipped about its true origins, perhaps fearing that its mysterious presence brings with it sinister energies best left undisturbed. Hidden in the deepest archives of a museum's forbidden collection rests an object so chilling many believe it holds a genuine demonic presence: the Horned Demon Mummy. Sealed carefully in a velvet-lined wooden box, this tiny skeletal figure with sharp horns, pointed ears, and grotesque fur-covered legs immediately conjures images of dark rituals and forbidden occult ceremonies. Rumored to have originated from an 18th century occultist who claimed to have summoned creatures from the infernal realms, this artifact was quietly donated to the museum museum under very mysterious circumstances, accompanied by warnings never to open its enclosure after midnight. Museum employees whisper tales of strange noises and unexplained shadows around its location, leading to it being carefully locked away, far from curious eyes that might accidentally awaken something best left sleeping. Hidden deep within a museum's secret storeroom sits Sydney Knows, an antique fortune-telling machine with a reputation darker than its cheerful, painted smile would suggest. Originally popular in the early 20th century arcades, visitors would insert a penny and eagerly await Sydney's predictions printed on small cards. But soon, unsettling stories emerged. Sydney's predictions often came disturbingly true, frequently foretelling accidents, illnesses, or tragedy. Some visitors claimed the doll's eyes would follow them, and whispers circulated of late-night workers hearing laughter or seeing Sydney operate without being activated. Frightened by the growing legend, museum staff quietly removed the machine from display, locking it securely away, though some still wonder if Sydney already knows exactly what awaits those who disturb him again. In a dimly lit museum archive sits one of the most unsettling children's books ever created, a pop-up book titled Medical Oddities: Nature's Anomalies and Carnival Gaffes. While pop-up books usually enchant children with playful characters, this particular volume does exactly the opposite. It is definitely not a children's book. Within its pages lurks a disturbingly realistic, mummified human face, accompanied by eerie photographs and unsettling descriptions of sideshow performers and bizarre anatomical specimens. Originally created as a macabre curiosity from the Neville Colmore collection, the book quickly gained notoriety when rumors began to surface about it causing nightmares, insomnia, and unexplained illnesses among those who dared to read it. Museum curators quietly pulled it from public display, locking it securely away, wary of the strange aura and the unsettling feeling that some pages are better left unopened.